their lives by. So for that reason, I want to talk about the topic I knew the least about, which was Jesus and women. Now, I was raised a Christian, and sort of good, because sort of my parents raised me Episcopalian, unity, reincarnation mixture. But I grew up studying the Bible in Sunday school, and I thought I knew everything. But the problem is you can know it and yet not know it. You can know what the verses say, but you don't know the social background. You really don't understand what that verse really means. So many people don't know how the interaction of Jesus and women. They have really no idea what the situation was with women at the time of Jesus. I knew nothing, and it was fascinating finding out about it. For example, I did not know that at the time of Jesus, women were not allowed to engage in worship at the synagogue. They had to be at the back of the temple. They were not allowed to touch anything in the temple because by doing so, they would defile it. I did not know they couldn't touch the scripture, no matter where they were. It would defile it. In the synagogue, they were only allowed to be spectators. Men are not supposed to talk to women publicly. They're not supposed to talk to them much anyway. They cannot talk to them publicly, even if they are married to them. You cannot talk to a woman publicly. And to do so was shocking. It was breaking a social custom. We all know what social customs are like. You don't sit down and eat with a homeless person. You don't talk to a woman publicly. It's a social wrong. So Jesus saw and treated women exactly the same way he treated men, which was very shocking. No wonder he was always in trouble, because he was doing things, he paid the price for it. He was doing things that was completely out of the social order. Jesus saw people as human beings with intrinsic value, with an inherent nobility. And that is what he talked to, that's what he responded to, and that's what he always addressed. Not woman or man, but as the inherently noble human being and that divinity within them. The Gospel of John says that Jesus openly talked to women. And when I read that as a kid, I was like, yeah. And so it's like, it's like, why are you telling me this? And it wasn't until later that I realized how truly shocking that was for a person of that time. That it was like, for John to even write about it was the fact that this is really unusual. He talked to women publicly. Whoa. And he did it often, which is even more shocking. John, in the Gospel of John, John tells us about that Jesus was speaking to a Samaritan woman at the well. And you read this as like, Samaritan. It's like, it's like being like a hospital down the street, Samaritan, Good Sam? No, Samaritans were a different clan, a different, what would you call them, tribe, than the tribe of Israel. Now, is the people of Israel, the people of Jesus's background, never spoke to Samaritans. Samaritans did not talk to Jews. They lived mutually exclusive lives. Samaritans were deeply looked down upon by the Jews. They were not spoken to. They were not even addressed. If you were in a room, I didn't look at you. They kind of avoided each other because they didn't like each other. But the Samaritans were very much second-class citizens at that time. So John tells us that Jesus not only spoke to a woman, he spoke to a Samaritan woman. So that's double shock. That's a big problem right there. He's speaking to a woman, and it's a Samaritan woman. So the gospel, I mean, you read this when you're kind of like, what's the problem here? And that the gospel says that the disciples were shocked that Jesus spoke to a Samaritan woman. So all the guys that were taught to respect Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the whole gang, they're all like, what? This is shocking. Do that. It's embarrassing. And it's like, but he did it. So let's start with Samaritans are the lowest of the low. You just, you can think of the lowest of the low in our society, what's that like? He goes up and talks to them. And they're despised by the Jews. There is no interreaction. And Jesus publicly talks to her, and it's the longest conversation that's recorded in all the Gospels between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. It's like, when you understand that background, it's like, whoa. Now the story is, Jesus and his disciples were traveling to Galilee, okay? But in order to do so, they had to travel through Samaria, where those Samaritans were. So the disciples go ahead to get food. Jesus stays behind and he goes to a well. And he goes down and the Samaritan woman comes up and he goes to her and he said, will you draw me water from the well? And she said, I'm a woman and I'm a Samaritan. How can you ask me to do this? It's like she knows the rules, and you are making the rules. And he says, she said, how can you ask me for a drink? But the conversation takes this extraordinary turn when Jesus tells her, he said, if you knew the gift from God and who it was that it's asking you for a drink, you would have asked this person to have given you living water. And she's like, what? She's like, she said, you're here, you have nothing to bring the water up from, and this well is deep. He said, where are you going to get living water? She's totally confused. And then she said, are you greater than our forefather Jacob? Like, Jacob is one of the Abrahamic fathers. He's like, he goes back centuries. So like, if you're saying, are you greater than the great, son of Abraham, that kind of Jacob? And he says, we're talking a biblical patriarch, Mr. Big. And Jacob's to tell you how big Jacob's other name is Israel. Yeah, I mean, that gives you sort of a sense of like who the guy is. So she says, are you greater than him? And Jesus doesn't even really respond to that. He says, everyone who drinks this water in the well will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I give them will have eternal life. Now she's really like, what? The amazing thing is that the Samaritan woman has just met him. She's already shocked herself because it's like he's breaking the rules. But this woman goes for it. She just goes for it. And she speaks to him very respectfully at this point. She said, sir, give me the water so that I won't be thirsty again. And I won't have to keep coming here to bring up the water. I won't have to run from this very deep well. The story gets even more interesting here because Jesus says to her, okay, go get your husband and come back. And the Samaritan woman says, I have no husband. And Jesus says, he knows this already because he's an incarnation. He knows the whole situation to begin with. And he says, yes, what you're saying is right. You are living with a man you're not married to. And in fact, you've done this. In fact, you've had 5 husbands. And she's like, but he says to her, what you are saying is true. And that's what makes the difference. And she says, I see you are a prophet. And then they together have this conversation on the different beliefs and values between the Jewish tradition and the Samaritan tradition. They're carrying on this philosophical, she's very educated woman, but they're having this talk about it. And then Jesus says this line to her, of which she was very fond. And he said, Jesus says, God is spirit, and God should be worshipped in spirit and in truth. So many love that line. In spirit and in truth. And the Samaritan woman, Jesus says that, and the Samaritan woman says, I know that the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus then throws the truth out to the wind, and does he give it to his disciples? He gives it to the Samaritan woman. He says, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Can you imagine what this, he's the truth of the Christ incarnation. He's giving to a Samaritan woman. When I was reading the Bible, I had no clue about this. I was reading the words, but I had no idea what they meant. And then the disciples come back with food. He's already put out the seeds to the wind, and they're utterly shocked that Jesus is there talking to a woman and a Samaritan woman. and he's just told her that he's the Messiah. It's like, huh. But we can see Jesus's breadth of vision and his utter courage. His utter courage. A courage that had very severe consequences. He didn't care, because what he appreciated about the Samaritan woman was that he said, what you say is true. She told the fact that it would get her into big trouble. Living with unmarried with a man, big, big trouble. But she spoke the truth to him. And that's why he blessed her in such a profound way. Because she spoke the truth, and he spoke the truth. And he lived the truth, no matter what the consequences. Extraordinary courage. So it's quite significant that Jesus chooses a woman, a Samaritan, and a big-time sinner. That's who he gives the truth to. Because under Judaic law, all these things are very bad indeed. But Jesus is making it important. He's making a very significant statement here, that the truth of the divine is available for everybody, not for the people who follow the rules of the law, but for those who follow the spirit of the law. And the first law of the spirit is love. Love, compassion, understanding, truthfulness, no hypocrisy. That's what no one of them can tolerate. Spiritual life is for everyone, no holds barred. No matter what you've done, no matter what happens, it's for everybody. So the Samaritan woman had 3 strikes against her, but Jesus doesn't care, because she's humble and she's truthful. And that paves the way for everybody else. Paves the way. And Sri Ramakrishna did the same thing with Girish Ghosh. He said, there's no sin I didn't commit. If I knew I was going to be tougher, I would have done so much more. You gotta love a guy like that. But he had utter faith. And to have that kind of utter faith means having utter humility. Because that kind of tremendous faith, you have to put your head on their feet and say, thy will be done. You know more than I do. My arrogance has to go down, because I realize that it is through you and no other way. That kind of humility. So with incarnations, faith goes a long way, because it means a lack of ego. If you're continually like arguing, I think I know better than this dude, he doesn't understand me, he doesn't see my thing. It's a lot of ego. When we have humility, we can really put the ego down where it ought to be, because otherwise we can't learn. If we think we know everything, how can we learn? We have to realize we know in spiritual life, our knowledge is really quite pathetic. And that we need to learn from those who've experienced it and know about it and can teach us. No one can teach us if we think we're so smart already. We can't learn. Faith also indicates an open heart. An open heart. That kind of transparency when we have that kind of faith. So Jesus, like Sri Ramakrishna, looked into the hearts of his followers, not what they did, not the words coming out of their mouth. Like Sri Ramakrishna was always very insistent. Mon the mind, the lips have to be one. If there's any discrepancy there, there's a problem. Then you've got a little hypocrisy slipping in. Jesus shows again and again that he can't bear hypocrisy. In the Gospel of Luke, we are introduced to a woman who's been bent over for 18 long years. Bent over. Can you imagine how painful that was? It's just like, she must have been in pain all the time. So Jesus sees her and he goes to heal her, and she's healed. But the rabbinical authorities, it's on the Sabbath. You don't do that on the Sabbath. So they come and they're just like, you did that, you're sinning against God, blah, blah, blah. And he called them out, the rabbinical authorities, you hypocrites. You've taken your cattle, you've taken your donkeys, you've walked them and you've watered them. You have taken care of your cattle and your donkeys. And this woman can't be healed? And he calls her a daughter of Abraham, which gives her the same status as the rabbinical authorities. She's a daughter of Abraham, the one they won't let touch anything inside the synagogue, daughter of Abraham. A very, very tender term. for a woman who'd been suffering for so long. They can't bear that kind of suffering. So, he was outraged by that. He called them out on their hypocrisy. He says, you hypocrites. He calls them out on it. Not a popular move. So authorities, of course, are not pleased, and it has its consequences. The consequences are kind of building up here. So let me tell you another one. There's a woman in, I believe, Jerusalem, who's been suffering for hemorrhaging blood for 12 years. You can imagine how unwell she was. 12 long years of hemorrhaging blood. Now, when a woman is going through a menstrual period, you are considered impure. You cannot touch anything or anybody, and you're basically an outcast. You have to live outside society. Anything you touch is polluted. Anything, you don't speak to anybody, you stay apart because you are human pollution. So Jesus is in a big crowd of people. This woman has the great faith that she will be healed by him. So she, in this huge crowd, she goes up and touches him. He feels that the gospel says he feels the power leaving his body. In other words, in our terms, we'd say, oh, she had some bad karma that she was working out. And like Takoro or mother would feel like, when touched. So Jesus feels that, he feels, and he said, who touched me? And the disciples are saying, you'll never know, forget it. You'll never know who touched you in this huge crowd. Who touched me? And this terrified woman, because she knows she should never touch anything or anybody, falls at his feet, weeping, saying that I'm the one. And again, he calls her a daughter, and says, your faith has healed you. Not I have, but your faith has healed you. In other words, she has that purity of soul that she realizes that inner purity of hers allows her to recognize Jesus for who he is. And she takes refuge at his feet, and that has healed her. Now again, people are mighty upset by that, but he doesn't, other people see her as polluted. He sees her as wounded humanity. So he heals her from the inside out. Can you imagine how she felt after 12 years of that, being shunned? It's just such a lesson for all of us. So the avatar, no matter which incarnation, has profound respect for humanity, no matter what form they take, no matter male or female. All incarnations have that, and that's what they respond to, is that what they respond to is the sincerity, the humility, and the deep nobility of every single human being. There's another lovely instant in which Jesus goes to this publican, a guy who thinks that he's the smartest. Well, smart, he has really no regard for Jesus. But he invites him to his home for supper. And he just kind of wants to get a lay of the land. So basically he can tell the other guys, oh, this guy's worthless. So he invites Jesus in to this, and they're sitting at the table together. And this woman has a bad name. In other words, she's got a bad rep. She's got a bad reputation. And so she comes in and she anoints Jesus's feet with oil, and she massages them. And then she pours water over his feet and washes them, and she dries them with her hair. And the publican is deeply shocked because he thought she should have not, because she is known to have a bad name. She's got a bad reputation. She's been a bad woman. He should not have anything to do with her. And so he's reacting this way. And Jesus, of course, can read his mind. And he says, when I came in, you did not greet me with a kiss. She has, since the minute I walked in, she has covered my feet with kisses. You did not offer me water to wash my hands. She has washed my feet with her tears and has wiped my feet with her hair. You did not anoint my hair with oil. She has now anointed my feet with oil. And then he just really gives it to her. And then Jesus says to her, he said, you didn't want to have anything to do with her. and you expected me to have nothing to do with her. And he said, I tell you that all her sins, which are many, are forgiven. He said, because she would not have had such love if she had not had such faith. Because of her love that purified her heart. And that because of that, he said, all your sins, which are many, are forgiven. Now, there's all that bad karma has been erased because of the burning intensity of her love and her faith. And that's the real lesson there. We don't judge by anyone's past. We judge by what their potential is as human beings. And I love it. And Jesus says, he tells the publican, it's the person who's forgiven little who's shown little love. I mean, basically, you small-minded little dude. Yeah. Those who can't forgive have a very cold heart. And what a miserable life to lead. What a miserable one. So that wonderful faith has love as its basis, and that's the all-purifying thing. So the last one is the famous story of where Jesus is this woman that she's been found in the middle of adultery, and all the guys are there ready to stone her. You know, it's got all the, and Jesus says, those of you who are without sin, you go ahead, cast the first stone. And they are all disgruntled because because someone else is going to call them out. What do you mean? I know what you did last week. I was there. They can't do it. So they're disgusted. They throw down their stones. The only one who can throw a stone is Jesus, who'd be the last person to ever throw a stone. Yeah. And basically, your sins are forgiven. Basically, what Sri Ramakrishna would tell people when they've done something terrible, don't do it again. Say, when ask, say, one of the rules, they said, dig a hole, tell what's in the tell, and then tell whatever you've done, and then never do it again. Make that real strong vrata, a real vow, I will never do it again. Start with a clean slate, but you have to start from truthfulness, which is what they always insist on. But we can see how powerful the faith of these people are, and how the incarnation responds to that purity of heart that comes with that real faith. So we can see that same great breadth of vision and open-heartedness with Sri Ramakrishna. And just like we really didn't understand the position of women at the time of Jesus, we also really don't understand the position of women 100, 200 years ago. We just don't. Especially from us of a Western background, we don't have a clue. So it's really important, and especially modern Indian women now. They can't imagine what it was like then, both for men and for women, because the situation has changed so much in such a recent time. So we often forget that when Sri Ramakrishna was alive, Purna was the norm. Women did not mix with men unless they were part of the family. They didn't go out. They stayed pretty much in the home, and they were protected in the enclosure of the home. It was a very different society than what we think a normal society is. In Sri Ramakrishna, we go into the inner apartments. The women aren't coming out. The women aren't sitting there in the audience. Sri Ramakrishna goes in to the inner apartments to greet the women. So it's quite extraordinary. We take it for granted, like, what's the big deal? His first guru was the Vairāvi Brahmani. We go, okay, that's great. No, it was really unusual, really quite out of the ordinary for a man to have a woman guru. That was really quite unusual. That was like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, there weren't that many women coming through, frankly. You wouldn't see a traveling woman. That would be a very, very dangerous thing. Women did not just go out. And if you were out, it's like, why do you think she carried that trident? So that was really unusual. Of course, the second was Totapuri. But what's even more astonishing was that on the night of Palaharani Kali Puja, that Sri Ramakrishna worshipped his young wife and gave her all the fruits of his austerities and put them at her feet. So she was inherited all of his spiritual wealth, because during that worship, he really realized to the depth of his soul who she was. She just wasn't little Sardamani. She was the Divine Mother herself. And it was during that worship that he had that experience and gave everything at her feet, allowing her to do the work that he wanted her to do and continue after his death. That was so critical. Sri Krishna's attitude towards women was completely liberating, because it was completely dependent on his view of them as absolute divinity. He literally saw all women as the embodiment of the Divine Mother, whether they were the highest possible caste, or whether they were a prostitute, whether there was own life, or whether it was a woman working in the theater. They were all the same Divine Mother, various guises. Sri Krishna said, I see all women as the Divine Mother. He said, I see no difference between a chaste woman and a prostitute. He literally saw them as different embodiments of the blissful Divine Mother, Anandamayi. They're all Anandamayi. And this he literally put into practice at the Star Theatre in Calcutta. Actresses were, now we hear of a famous actress like, oh, wow, this actress came through, I saw her. Wow, she was with this. Anyway, then no way. Actresses were severely looked down upon because they came from prostitute quarters. Because a good woman, you can't be imported and show up on the stage. A good woman is not going to be in public view. She's not going to be what they call a public woman, right? So you're going to have to be, by definition, you're a bad woman if you're going up on a stage. And he went with them and loved them and blessed them repeatedly. That's why in the green room of all those theaters in Calcutta, whose picture do you see? Sri Krishna. They make pranam to him before they go out on the stage. He revived Calcutta theater. He revived Bengali theater by his not only acceptance, his embrace of the people in the theater, which was an extraordinary thing to do, and it cost him devotees. Because those Brahmo people were deeply puritanical and deeply shocked. It was bad enough he worshiped Kali, but that he should go and see public women, that was deeply shocked. Even so, some of his, when you read the reminiscences of Sri Krishna, you will see them blaming themselves, because my attitude at that time was so narrow-minded, I did not visit him after a certain point in time. You know why? Because he was going to the theater. That's why. Because they felt that he could not really have good moral qualities, and how could you go see a man who really did not have the appropriate moral qualities to be a spiritual teacher? So theaters were seen as dens of iniquity. And yeah, they were filled with him, with the opium smokers and addicts and public women and everything else. Sri Krishna went in there filled with joy. He blessed them. He blessed them with his hands, even his feet, putting his feet on some of these great actresses, putting on their heart. Anandamayi. The famous actress Binodini said that when Sri Krishna came backstage, she sat at his feet and he placed his hands, she said he placed his hands on my head and he blessed me saying, Ma, may you have Chaitanya. Amazing. And not long before Sri Krishna's death, Binodini wanted to see him before he died. He was extremely ill at that point, very close to death. He was in Kasipur. And they had, Shashi Maharaj and other people were at the door, barring the door because they didn't want him disturbed by it. But then this young boy comes, and this little boy, let him go sit. Well, it was actually Binodini in disguise. So he goes upstairs. She takes her hat off, and all of her long tresses come down, and Sri Krishna laughs. He's just perfectly entertained by it. And he blessed her again. And she would recall that again and again with tears in her eyes about how much Paramahamsa Deva blessed her and loved her. Completely transformed life. The Indian Marxist historian Sumit Sarkar said that his unexpected blessing of the theater women gave new respectability to the theater period. And it said, and he became sort of a patron saint to that group of people that was utterly despised by many. People felt good despising those people because it made them feel better. I'm good. Now these people are bad. No matter what I do, they are really bad. So if we try to compare Sri Krishna to Jesus, both of them had women disciples, and they both broke social restrictions to include them. And they both healed them in their own different way, and they prioritized them. But Jesus's world, importantly, didn't have a sannyasa tradition, and that is the critical difference here. Because Sri Ramakrishna had to be a model for both householders and for sannyasins. He had taken sannyasa vows. There is absolutely no monastic tradition in Judaism, none whatsoever. It's all about marriage and family. And Sri Ramakrishna had to uphold a monastic tradition because he knew that the monastic tradition would spring from him, and he was going to be the one that they were going to watch. His life had to be so utterly pure and utterly unreproachable, so that people would say, we knew. So that he had to be extremely careful with all of his behavior concerning women. This is why you hear when he talks to men, Kamini Kanchana, women in gold, women in gold. He also trained those monks to be exactly the same way, because they were not accepted in the beginning. They were not at all. So their lives too had to be extremely careful, because otherwise they would never be able to do what they were meant to do in this world. It was even when they started doing seva, they were reviled. They were called, was outcast monks, or what was the monkey sadhus. Yeah, those clean the latrine sadhus. Yeah, those come because they took care of the sick. Real sadhus don't do that. They don't sully their hands. They meditate on Brahman and let everyone else die around them in pain and agony. Yeah, that's what a real sadhu is. So it took years for them to be accepted. They didn't care. Sri Ramakrishna knew, though, that as far as the real two things were lust and greed. Those are the two main attractions. So on that, no compromise, because there's always people who will look up and say, let's knock them down. We'll show people how they are. So their lives had to be without reproach. Now that's why in the gospel you hear this woman in gold, and when you're a woman, it's like you're getting hit back and forth, so you get a tick, woman in gold, because you start feeling really bad about it. Yeah. I've had women come into the bookstore, open it up, see woman in gold, and slam it down. How can you read that? How can you read that stuff? It's disgusting. And then there are, of course, whole pages in the introduction about it, and there's footnotes about it. It doesn't matter. No one reads the introduction. No one reads the footnotes. They open it up randomly, and it's like, woman in gold. What kind of nonsense is that? I have enough misogyny. I don't need to have some, religious person telling me that I'm the problem. I know who the problem is. It's like, believe me, it's mutual. When Sri Ramakrishna was talking to his male disciples about Kamini Kanchana, he was talking about lust and greed. Importantly, when M translates his own gospel in his own words, he doesn't say woman and gold. M himself writes lust and greed. Swamiji, when he came to this country, he never said woman and gold. He said lust and greed. Sri Ramakrishna, when he talked to women, he was equally vehement about not trusting the wiles of men. He talked about Purusha Kanchana, men and gold, Don't trust them. Don't trust them. Keep away from them. You think they're going to know. Why? Because these are the strongest biological poles there are. The strongest one comes from pural sex. Biology takes its toll. And the human desire for acquisition, more than my share, take, also part of it. So when he spoke to women, it was Purusha Kanchana. And it's really hard with that translation because it makes women feel like they're second-class citizens. And the problem is we have so few records from women because women were largely illiterate. They weren't writing things down. Also, we only have the record for the most part about from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which was M, who visited Sri Ramakrishna mostly on Saturdays and Sundays. he only visited him on holiday or the weekend. I think it was Saturday. So we don't, and during that time when Sri Ramakrishna goes into the inner apartments to talk to the women, M isn't there. He isn't there to record it. The women they're illiterate. They're not writing anything down. So we don't have very many recordings, only those who actually were educated enough, like Gorima, to be able to record these. So I think that's a problem for us. But those people the women who were with Sri Ramakrishna repeatedly said how much love they felt from him, again and again, how much love they felt. And it's important that Sri Sarnadeni herself said how valuable the gospel is, how she felt like Sri Ramakrishna was there when she was speaking. At the same time, she said that when I was with Thakur, I felt like a picture of bliss was pouring from overflowing from my heart. She always felt, she said, how much respect Sri Ramakrishna had for her, that when he accidentally called her Tui, he couldn't sleep that night and went to her in bed because he thought she was Lakshmi, his niece. So he was speaking to someone younger. But he couldn't forgive himself. He felt he was so terrified he'd offended her, that he didn't mean to use anything. It was because he had such enormous respect for her. He had daily contact with not only Holy Mother, she started leading with other women also. He had daily contact with them, and he continually were teaching them all. And M was not there recorded. So his disciple Gorima wrote that she said, certainly Sri Ramakrishna warned against lust and greed. She said, but surely not against women. She said, just as he advised ascetic-minded men to guard themselves against the dangers of lust and greed in women's charms, I love that, he also cautioned pious women against men's company. He advised them to stay away from them. He said he had not the slightest contempt for women. He said rather he had intense sympathy and profound regard for them. This is one of the few women who could record her reminiscences. And it's interesting that M himself, when he was translating, never used lust and greed. Now, all that aside, obviously a sadhu, a maker of monks, not just a monk himself, but a maker of monks, has to be so careful. So when Sri Ramakrishna was asked by a sadhu, he said, sir, how should we recognize a sadhu? And Sri Ramakrishna said, a sadhu is one who never forgets to look upon woman as his mother. And he never forgets to offer his worship, his puja to her if he is near her. That's some regard. That's some regard, not like this sort of nominal respect, but actual worship if he is near her. Regarding her with such reverence as mother, but offering puja. Yogi Sri Ramakrishna's disciple, said, everyone now says, oh, he did not allow women to touch him or even go near him. She said, we laugh when we hear that. And we say, we're not dead yet. She said, who can explain, who can say how kind he was to us? He was so kind. She said he had the same attitude towards men as towards women. And she saw plenty because she was living with Holy Mother all those years. She was right there. She saw him every single day. She said, but it's true that if women stayed with him too long, he would say, go to the temple. But she said he also said that to men. If they were the wrong person to be there, he said, go visit the temples, go visit. They had to be very careful. Yogi Ma was not only Sri Ramakrishna's disciple, but along with Golab Ma, she was Holy Mother Sri Sarnadeni's lifelong companion. She lived with her so closely. And after Mother's death, she was asked, she said, oh, Ma, please tell us about Holy Mother, her compassion. And this is actually, Mother was still alive. And Yogi Ma said, oh yeah, well, Mother certainly loves us very much, but her love doesn't have the intensity of Thakur's. Yeah. What? We can't even imagine having more love than Mother's. And she said, what love and concern he had for us, for his women disciples. She said, we saw it with our own eyes. She said, words can't describe the amount of love that we felt from him. And you see, women aren't given this knowledge. We don't know this. You have to really search it out. And so unless we happen to read this in some arcane place, we don't know about it. And then we always get this last women and gold, women and gold, women and gold. You know, you feel like a parrot that's been beaten up. It's like, no, no, no. How much love he has. How much love. So if we listen to the voices of women, we get a totally different perspective. And that's important to have. Because to a single person of the women who knew Sri Ramakrishna, every single one said how much love, intense love, they felt from him, how much concern, how much care that he had for them. She said, Yogin Ma said, how kind, how affectionate the master was with us. When strangers casually just read the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, they can come to the conclusion he didn't like women. She said, we just laugh. We just laugh. Sri Sarada Devi, Holy Mother, often spoke of the intense joy she just felt being in his presence, just being able to see him. And he not only literally worshipped her, but he really took care of her in very, very down-to-earth, literal ways. We know how averse Sri Ramakrishna was to any sort of money, any sort of gold, anything like that, anything materially, a total disinterest from, wouldn't touch it. But he made sure the Holy Mother got beautiful bangles. Mm-hmm. He went way out of his way because he had a vision of Sita, and he wanted to give Mother the gold bangles to resemble those. So he had them made of gold, and he had them like done in such a way that they looked like faceted diamonds. He had those made for her out of gold because women like to be adorned. Women love their children. That tender little thing is like, I want these made for her. I want these made for her. I want these made for Mother. And he was so concerned that she'd be provided for after her death. He asked her specifically, how much do you need? How much? Because you need to be taken care of. He made sure that there would be enough money set aside for her, which of course Freedoy interfered with. But how much she had allowance coming so that she'd be comfortable, a plot of land to make sure she would grow her vegetables. He was very concerned about every single detail of her life. He got very worried. He was very worried about her. He wanted her to get out of that Nakabat. He said a bird kept in the cage will never be healthy and strong. You need to get out more. He was very concerned about her. And it's really important to remember that at a time when women did not go out, he wanted Mother to continue his spiritual work. And she was like, no way. She said, how can I do that? He said, you'll have to continue my work after I'm gone. She said, no, how can I do that? He said, nothing doing. You will have to do. And she said, no, I can't. He said, you will have much more work. You will do much more work than me. After all, what is this done? He was in Samadhi. He did not have that many disciples. You will have much more work to do. And she had to do it. And he gave her all the mantras, everything. It's very interesting. Sri Ramakrishna taught her all the mantras. All the mantras that we have now come through Sri Ramakrishna via Sri Sarada. Everything. She said Sri Ramakrishna with his own hands drew for me the picture of the Kundalini and the chakras. He drew that herself for her. You know, Sri Ramakrishna expressed sorrow to Gauri Ma over the condition of India's women. We never think of Sri Ramakrishna even caring. He's always in samadhi, he's dancing, he's singing. But to her, he conveyed his deep sorrow, his profound worry and concern about the condition of India's women. It really pained him. He said, they are greatly suffering. He said, they're drowned to their necks in the darkness of ignorance. Not just spiritual ignorance, just plain basic knowledge of any kind of knowledge that simple boys were given. They were not given that opportunity. He said, you must take up the burden of educating them, educating women. How many of us have heard this? No. Sri Ramakrishna told Gauri Ma, you must alleviate that. And she said, no, 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 no. She said, I'm going to take a few girls and I will go to the Himalayas and I will train them. And Sri Krishna said, no, 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 no going to the mountains. No, 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 no going to the mountains. You stay here. He said, you have done enough spiritual disciplines. No more tapasya forget you forget. You go and take care of these women and you educate them. That is how much Sri Krishna loved women. That's how much he cared for them in a very, very earthly way. They need to be educated, just as Swamiji said. Where do you think Swamiji got these ideas? Thakur. Education of women, he said, India will never rise unless women are educated. Where did that come from? Sri Krishna himself. So Gauri-Ma did it. She founded the Sardeshwari ashram that still exists today. Sister Devamata says that when Sri Krishna's visit, when he came to visit his women disciples, she was there and wasn't. When Sri Krishna came to visit the women disciples, there were occasions of great joy. It was like huge celebration. And she said, in his simple and informal way, he would talk to these women for hours. Not recorded. M wasn't there. Amazing. Sumit Sarkar, our famous Marxist historian, said, Sri Krishna won the devotion of many women. He said, we have accounts of women casting off their inhibitions and their purna restrictions, and went to Dakshineshwar, all the way up to Dakshineshwar in a spirit of joyous abandon, throwing everything off. I'm going to Dakshineshwar. I'm going there. I'm going to see the Paramahansa. Why? For the same reason when Krishna played his flute, the women came dropping everything and running over there. Same thing. Feeling that intense love, feeling that pull of being pulled. I feel like I have to go there. I have to go there. No matter what the social restrictions, off they went. They had to go to Dakshineshwar. There's only one thing that'll make you, if you're going to be criticized, you're not going to do that so easily. You're going to have your family down on you, your relatives on you. Only love will make you do that. You can't bear to be separated. So I go too long, but I just want to say a few words about Swamiji. You probably all know this great thing from the laws of Manu. Makes you feel so warm inside. Day and night, men should keep women from acting independently. For attached as women are to sensual pleasures, men should keep them under their control. Her father should guard her in her childhood. Her husband guards her in her youth, and her sons guard her in her old age. A woman is not qualified to act independently. To which Swamiji said, the ideal of perfect womanhood is perfect independence. Go Swamiji, right? Yeah. Swamiji didn't care about upsetting anyone's apple carts. If society was upset, good. Good. Let them be upset. Because he wanted freedom and strength for every human being, especially if they had been oppressed. And he wanted that for women as well. Swamiji said, freedom is the first condition of growth. Without growth, without what he said, whatever does not make you free, if something's not free, it will never grow. And that's the reason he gave sannyasa to some of the most least promising people that could have possibly existed, because he wanted them to have the opportunity to growth. Nivedita wrote to Josephine McLeod about her own brahmacharya and the sannyasa given to Sarabul. Nivedita wrote, Swamiji arranged the cloth as a skirt and a chadar around Sarabul, who was given an overcloth. And then he called her sannyasini, and he put one hand on her head and one hand on mine. That's Nivedita's. He said, I give you all that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa gave to me. What came to us from a woman, that is the Bhairavi Brahmani and the Divine Mother herself, Ma Kali, Sri Sarvadeva. What came to us from a woman, I give to you two women. Women's hands will be the best anyway, from what came from a woman, from Mother, the Divine Mother herself. That is Swamiji. Now, Swamiji's been credited for many things, but the one thing he's rarely credited for was starting that sannyasa tradition in the West, which is the great freedom giver. That would never have happened if Swamiji had not come to the West. Had he never come, this tradition would not be here. He came and gave that. He gave so much to the West, but that one thing they rarely mention, sannyasa, brahmachari vows. That great freedom giver, breaker of all bonds. He wrote Kanana Baba Pandana, he himself was a breaker of bonds. Amazing. He said when he was concerned, should he come to the West, should he not come to the West? Who did he write? He didn't sit and think about it. He wrote Mom. He wrote Sri Sarda Devi. He wrote her. And then when the letter came from her saying, yes, go, the report is Swamiji alternately danced and wept with joy. And he said, it's all right now. It is the will of the mother. It is the will of the mother. Who was guiding him? Is there any difference between Thakur and Sarma? No. Two sides of the same coin. Two different aspects of the one divine reality. Are they different from Mahakali? Shamakrishna said, I see you exactly as I see the Bhavatarani in the temple. Same thing. Swamiji wrote to his brother disciples, you have not yet understood the wonderful significance of Mother's life, none of you. But gradually you will. Without Shakti, there is no regeneration for the world. Mother has been born to revive that wonderful Shakti in India. Swamiji was intent on women's freedom, and he was going to do everything he could to get it, whether through education, through spirituality, everything he possibly could. He said, you see, I cannot but believe that there is somewhere a great power that thinks of herself as feminine and is called Kali and Mother. Swamiji, who's known as the Great Anointed, great worshiper of the Divine Mother. It pained him to see women treated as second-class citizens and acting as second-class citizens, not seeing themselves as who they really were. That embodiment of the Divine Mother. He gave so much of his energy reminding all of us who we really are, divinity itself, and especially to women who've been oppressed for so long who did not have a chance of realizing their own divine nature. And that's sort of like where I'd like to leave us today, to remember who we really are. Thakur, Ma, Swamiji all came to remind us of who we are, to remind us that we are nothing but in the embodiments of the divine. And when we look at another human being, we see nothing but the divine. We first see Atman. We first respond to that divinity, and then we add the name and form. And Swamiji reminds us, first see Atman, respond to that. See everyone as the embodiment of the divine. Then bother with the name and form. He himself saw nothing but spirit and divinity. And they remind us to always remember who we are and remember who truly everyone else is. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Now, if there are any questions, any arguments, disputations?
Mataji, I have just a question. I don't know. So there were women monks in US given monk code or whatever you call by Swamiji.
There was one. There was a Payananda who gave some lectures and then went to Australia and did some work there. And then after a few years, became a Vaishnava. She went to India for a short time. It was absolutely impossible and made it very difficult for people like Nivedita and Christine because she was so demanding. But she gave it a good try. Was not her thing. But you see, she had set the once that precedent had been set, you couldn't undo it. Sarah Bull was given the Garawa cloth because he had that much respect for her spirituality and because he could see her total renunciation. To all appearances, she was still a mother. She had her daughter Olea, who was obviously a very disturbed woman in many ways. She did that to all to every possible thing she could, took care of her in every way. But her heart was in supporting Swamiji's work in the West and in India. That was her whole thing. She supported J.C. Bose. She supported Nivedita in her work with women. That was her, everything was in giving, giving, giving. Yes. And then Thakur himself gave to Gauriama. Gave Gauriama. That's no joke. That is no joke. What a history we have. What a really noble history we have. It's not much attention is given to it, but I think it will be in the future. I do strongly feel it will be in the future.
Yeah, well, I think about when we talk about Vedanta as a new religion, when he gave that beautiful lecture talking about Vedanta as the new way of thinking, this is exactly what people need to hear to bring this out, because the Western mind needs to understand the similarities of universal truth. You know,
Yeah.
When you talk about Vivekananda, the favorite saying of Vivekananda, that to worship in spirit and truth, he didn't talk about gender.
No.
And was it in the Katha Upanishad when Nachiketa said, "Tell me that by which I'll live forever," right?
Yeah, yeah.
And this woman, the Samaritan woman, had the same concern. So our concerns are human concerns.
Human concerns, and then
are the same.
Are the same. Then we deal with the same ultimate questions.
Yeah.
The same ultimate
Across.
questions across the board. It's like, how do we deal with mortality?
Right.
How do we deal with the fact that this body will die? How do we deal with the fact that I long for something more than I can get out of this world?
Right.
What does that mean when I feel like I've had everything I wanted and it's not enough? Or I get something that I thought I wanted and it's like, yeah, this longing that sort of is beyond something that we can get. What do I do with that? And that is across the board in every culture and every religion.
And this religion allows that form.
Yes, and it includes every religion. It's like, I love thinking of Swami Swaminatha and his Christian disciples, his Muslim disciples. He was laughing. He said, I have 3 Muslim disciples.
And he allowed people to stay in their own lane
Absolutely.
if they needed to.
Yeah, no, and they
wanted
felt,
to, you know,
if whatever you can grow from, keep it. Whatever inhibits your growth or you feel uncomfortable with, put it behind you. Whatever you love, keep. Whatever you feel is inhibiting your joy and your ability to spiritually grow, put that aside. And maybe you'll come back to it later and see it in a different way. Maybe what pinched you was something that you didn't really understand it well. But none of it are ever encouraged to leave their own home tradition.
Right.
Like, it's quite amazing that of all of Swamiji's disciples, it was Ellen Waldo. It was the one who really accepted Sri Krishna. This one you don't hear very much about at all. So it's quite interesting. Most of them, they were quite content to stay within their Christian tradition, and wouldn't have dreamed, with all love and reverence for Sri Krishna and Sri Sarvadeva, they still maintain their Christian background. And there's I know a number of people who were Jewish, and they keep their Jewish tradition. A friend of ours, his wife started coming to Vedanta. He was like, what is this? He said, you're a Jew by day and Hindu at night. What is this? She said, I'm a Jindu. What can I do? And in fact, he later got initiated by Swami Swaminatha. So he's doing the same thing. Yeah, a lot of Jews came into the tradition, especially right in the 40s, right after 40s, early 50s, after World War II. How do you explain the Holocaust? Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. How do you explain that kind of suffering? So for many of them, it was like they came to Vedanta. It's like, karma, reincarnation, rather than, you're the chosen people. This is what you're chosen to do. It's like not popular. When I went to a synagogue in Croatia, and I was asking, there's only one rabbi for the whole country. And I said, how do you explain this of being the chosen people with the Holocaust? Because so many, the vast majority perished. And he said, well, no one really believes this anymore. It's a cultural thing. I went, oh, I'm so sorry. There's so many beautiful mystical things in the tradition, but because they're so traumatized, like how do you explain that, especially when the 97% has been wiped out? It may be a little high, maybe 95%, something like that. I mean, it was really quite astonishing. So a lot of people who found their own home traditions unpalatable, maybe after a while, it's like I had very little appreciation for Christianity until I became a real Vedantist. And then when I read like Swami Prabhupada's Sermon on the Mount according to Vedanta, it's like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then when I started reading Christian mystics, oh, there we go. There's a lot of similarities here, way more similarities than there are differences. And then when I read about Jesus in this new light, it's like, wow, what a courageous man who actually put these beliefs into practices, and what immense love, the kind of immense love that we can't even imagine. Yeah. It's really kind of gratifying to go back after decades and read something that we kind of dismissed. It's like, wow, there's gold in them Dar hills. It's really, really good. It's really feeds the soul. Really astonishing. Get so much appreciation for these traditions that we just like, yeah. Because it's very easy for us to hook on to, look what they're doing in the church, look what they do over there, pure hypocrisy. It's like, no kidding. But you can't judge Christ by Christianity. You can't judge by the worst of a lot. You judge by the best. And you look at the founder and you see the difference, how poor Christ has been misinterpreted so many times, has been used in political purposes. Yeah, the way it usually is. But no.
Well, I thought this is not you don't even have to answer the question. Your talk was titled Avatar and the Avatar and
Women.
So you mentioned two remarkable examples. So could it be generalized and said, and I think no, that all avatars will maybe look upon women as goddesses or whatever, but in their life there are not much proof of their being, they're needing a consort or somebody. So like Jesus himself did not have a
No, but he had Mother Mary.
Mother Mary.
Mother Mary, who is the Shakti of Jesus.
And then if I fully extrapolate, we don't have, at least I don't know much about Chaitanya, Buddha, Jainism, Mahavir. And also in Muhammad's case, there was quite some respect for women in his first wife and others. Was it extended to other women?
Well,
Can you tell us a little about
I know very little, but what I do know is that until the time of Muhammad, women had the status of less than camels.
Yes.
They were simply property.
Yes.
And it was Muhammad that insisted that they can inherit, that they were given regard and respect. And it was only through Muhammad, and that was going against society as well. They didn't have equal thing of men, but they were given, I think, half the respect or half. I mean, they could inherit half the property a man could, but at least it was something. And then he had great regard for his wife and his, I believe his daughter. I know very little about it, but what little I vaguely remember impressed me. That it wasn't until the time of Muhammad that women stopped being looked upon as property.
What surprises me after like so many incarnation and avatars that came and taught us about respect to women or worship the woman, but it's still like not that level yet. We are still treated as property.
Well, yeah, often, but I think you have to think, well, after how many thousands of years of incarnations coming, how much are people following their teachings? In any way. I mean, I think we have the same wars over and over and over and over again. The same hate, the same bigotry, the same selfishness.
Yes.
It's like the evolved people evolve. Then they get off the planet. And then the people come up and they learn. But the law of karma is inexorable. That whatever suffering you inflict, that will come back in some sort of painful way. That's often the only way we learn. We ourselves have been in the position of inflicting suffering in a previous life. We ourselves were ignorant. We ourselves were the first ones to demean people. And that's how we evolve, is through making mistakes. Swamiji said, I bless every one of my, I've made many blunders. I bless every one of my mistakes, because without them, we never come to where we are through many lifetimes, often through great suffering.
But do we remember, like, how do we learn if we cannot remember the karma we did?
Because I think there is some way in which we become a little more empathetic. We develop empathy and kindness, and I cannot help but believe that comes from our own previous experience of suffering. That, you know, when we suffer ourselves, when we feel others suffering.
And when you're allowed the privilege of aging.
Yeah, the privilege of aging, but even
Privilege of
like,
aging.
I remember as a child, when I had a girlfriend who was dying of leukemia by the time she was in 6th grade. And it haunted me. It's like, if God is love, how can this happen? She's done nothing wrong. She's done nothing wrong. She's a kid. And how sick she got. How she turned around, she'd get bruised. And then I remember even as a child, how could God allow the Holocaust? How could he have allowed Hiroshima? And just, I would read obsessively on this, how could God have allowed that? And so this question about how can this suffering exist is that which pushes us further into more self-knowledge and into knowledge of trying to find some sort of divine reality, where there is a worldview that makes sense to us. Not that everybody should have it, but that it makes enough sense to us so that we can navigate this world that we're living in. Because unless we can figure out some sort of worldview, some sort of pattern that makes sense to us, we can't get through the day. Because we'd be just paralyzed, but paralyzed by grief or by feeling of helplessness. Like, how can I fix it? When I was 15, I was so obsessed with the war in Vietnam. I'd wake up, I was a kid, I was 14, 15. I didn't work hard enough to stop the war. It's like, well, that takes some special kind of ego to think that 15 you can stop the war in Vietnam personally. But I tried. Yeah, the insanity of youth. But yeah, idealism.
But Mataji, it is a little bit ironic, right? That women are the mothers, and they teach their sons too.
Adi Guru,
Yeah.
first teacher.
Yeah, and they should be respected. But for that's point one, and point two is yesterday you made a point, which was that maybe women, this generation or this 100 years to I don't know, the women are focused on becoming economically independent.
Economically, socially.
Yeah.
Um,
And maybe later on they will think about sannyas, because they were denied that.
they were denied basic rights.
Yeah. So for instance, I mean, women are physically weaker. I mean, when we are young, I was young. I feel now that I have crossed that stage, I can say it clearly. There was a tension in my mind that, okay, if I do this, like walking back alone at night, my father would be facing, and the point is that he knows that's why he's facing. But it's so many restrictions just because I don't have that trishul in my hand. Second point was, right, this fathers and mothers go through these tensions, that what kind of marriage that will be, the daughters will be. And at least in my generation, the parents started thinking about economic independence. So they don't have to rely so much on the marriage. So we are working out maybe that kind of stuff in these. So there is some evolution. Because-
Well, only, but remember, we're only talking about this percentage of the population of the entire world.
Yeah, that's true.
What about the other? We tend to think about our own little bubble.
Yes.
We can't say that about Africa. We can't say that about Asia, a lot of Asia. We can't say that about so many societies. We can't say that even in our own populations. Latin America, yeah, it's very rough. It's very rough.
Yes.
But again, the law of karma is inexorable. What we experience this life, well, results of that will go on to the next. Where we take on a certain body and are born into a certain family for very good reason. This is where we're going to learn the most. So we can't expect society to ever become perfect. If it was, why would we strive for liberation? If it was comfortable, we'd all just hang out here. We have to become uncomfortable. Whether spiritually, socially, everything else, it's like there has to be some sense of dissatisfaction with where things are. So that we can go, I have to have something more in life. If things are all hunky-dory, we're not going to look for anything more. It's like Sita, when she said, oh, Rama, these people that, they need to have everything, and you have beautiful houses, everything, and then nothing happens. People won't want to work. Well, Rama, nothing's being taken care of. He said, well, if everyone's perfectly satisfied, then everything's kind of perfect stasis, perfect homogeneity is another way of saying tamas in a certain way. It's just stagnant.
Yes.
Stagnant. You have to have some sort of a movement. And that inequality. Swamiji said you get rheumatism in one part, it goes away, hits your shoulder, have the shoulder, then the knee goes out. There's always that tension. And after the Berlin Wall fell, it's like, oh, now it's the end of communism. Ha 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 ha. Everything's going to be fine now. Peace in the world. It'll be universal peace. Right? That's worked. It's not meant to be perfect. It's not meant to be okay. It's meant for there to be pockets of pain. It's meant to be pockets of joy. And we will all experience both in our lives. If we haven't had, I remember a neighbor of ours across the street, she said, I have such a charmed life. I've never experienced any pain or any difficulty. And I thought, I said, I'll make you just better pray. Because within a month, her husband said, by the way, I'm divorcing you. I'm taking, and he had an offshore account. So you're getting none of the money. And it was like, bum, 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 bum. And her whole world fell apart. It's like everything, we never expect anything that we're always hoping for something good. We never expect anything bad. And when it comes, we often, unless we have that sort of inner support, we won't be able to tolerate it. We won't be able to have the strength to be able, that was why I was so encouraged with the children, chanting and learning these stories. Because those chants kind of remind us of our real nature. It's really important to give that to kids and reminding ourselves of our real nature. And also to send out those good thoughts to everybody. Very important. Swamiji made a point about that. Send out good thoughts to everybody. So those peace chants, I mean, we really think about what we're saying, what we're chanting. It's quite beautiful. And it really does make a difference. Sending out good thoughts, may everyone be happy. May everyone be free from pain. May everyone be free from disease. Everyone find joy in their lives. Those things are very important. If we can't do anything else, if we're stuck in bed with a fever, at least we can send out good thoughts to everybody else. And it definitely does make a difference. Any other questions or arguments?
This is a comment that, and it's not a logical one. Jesus did not necessarily preach equality of men and women, but
He didn't have to.
he didn't have to because his life showed.
Because it's like he was already getting in trouble.
But look at history. Though democracy in the Western civilization was invented in perhaps 19th century, even early 18th century.
18th century.
18th century. But we did not have women's votes, women's franchise until 1911.
Mm-hmm.
We, in our constitution, blacks are considered what? 3/4,
1/3.
1/3 of the men. So
Mhm.
look, with all those teachings.
We always, yeah, it's like, you're not quite as human as I am. You're not as good as I am. Same thing with the Greeks.
But the weak.
Yeah, the Greeks
But the
too.
blacks too.
Yeah, it could only be free men and the educated men in Greece. Of course, no women, that's obvious. Also no slaves. There was a lot of slaves in Greece. Also, not just ordinary Greeks, Greek men had to be educated. So it's like, thus it will ever be. It'll be like the people with power want to keep the power. People without power want the power. Once the people get the, well, people without power get the power, they do the same thing to everybody else. It's just so history has taught us. And they say those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Okay, well, then I think we can adjourn, and thank you everybody here and out there for joining us. We enjoyed your company.